Hi, and welcome to our class on Jewish philosophy. Again, I'm Asher Meza, and I'll be teaching you tonight. We're still in the book, The 9 Questions That People Ask About Judaism by Rabbi Joseph Tolushkin and Dennis Prager. Let me see, what page did we leave off last week? 1 second here. Okay. Actually, Okay, I think we could go ahead and start on page 68, the middle of page 68, actually, 5 lines from the top. And again, please bear with me. I'm actually broadcasting today from New York, and I was able to get a spot where I could do this class without too many interruptions. Okay, so on the top of page 68, it says, unethical and unkind people who pretend to be religious commit the sin of Chilul Hashem, the desecration of God's name. The consequent alienation from religion of people who might otherwise become or remain religious is underscored in the Talmud, when it says, if someone studies Bible and Mishnah, oral law, but is dishonest in business and discourteous in his relationship with people, what do people say about him? Woe unto him who studies the Torah. This man studied the Torah. Look how corrupt are his deeds. How ugly his ways. This comes out in Yuma 86a. Okay. Then it speaks about observance and moral intent. Okay. Observance of Jewish laws between people and God does not render one more moral unless these laws are observed with the intention of becoming more moral. To expect otherwise, to expect the mechanical observance of Jewish person to God laws will automatically create moral individuals is to confer upon Jewish law some magical quality which one would deem absurd if applied to any other area of his or her life. Can one be expected to grasp the meaning of Shakespeare by mechanically reading his words without intending to learn from them? Is it not possible to read Shakespeare's plays and to learn little or nothing from them? Is Shakespeare then to be considered worthless? This relationship between observance and moral intent is in no way a new interpretation on how Jewish law functions. The Bible constantly warns the person to God laws can have but a minimal moral effect when observed without the intention of becoming moral. The prophets constantly attacked those Jews who mechanically observed these laws, betrayed a lack of concern for the ethical principles underlying them. For example, in Jeremiah 7, the Jew who observes Jewish person to God laws while behaving in a reprehensible manner towards people treats these laws as exercises in ritual rather than as moral training. The result is observance, which is morally, hence religiously, worthless. Give me 1 second here. Okay. Now, this is really a great topic they're touching on here, right? And today I think is perhaps the 8th or 9th class that I've given on Jewish philosophy. But I have to tell you, if you could pick up anything from these classes, please, my friends, pick this up. when the author says here that people performing mitzvahs by themselves do not make them moral unless their goal is ultimately goodness or morality. He says to expect otherwise is to attribute some magical aspect to the mitzvahs, which is actually what the vast majority of Jews ridiculously have done nowadays. And the author also notes that this is not typically something they would apply to another area of their lives, so why do they do it to their religion? Interesting, huh? This is what has made the existence of religious Jews today irrelevant, mainly due to the rise of spirituality within the religion. Everyone knows my views on this, because the spiritual cannot exist on its own, and it has to feed on the practical to exist, to that point that it ends up killing the practical and ultimately makes it irrelevant, which is one of the main reasons that I'm a strong opponent to books like the Zohar, or books that have tried to make Jews, let's say, too heavenly good that they're no earthly good, right? Not that I believe that it has any heavenly truth in it, because I don't. And also, like the author notes here, is that that the theme constantly appears in the Hebrew scriptures, right? That the prophets constantly chastise the Jews for missing the mark, a mark that's clearly in front of them. But however, it's not so clear in the sense that this is something that does not only affect Jews, as we can see, because we can clearly see that this is pretty much also what the church, let's say in Europe, experienced before the European collapse of Christendom. So in the same way, this has begun to affect Judaism, in the way that you have many unaffiliated Jews refusing to embrace a religious lifestyle due to its lack of purpose. Not Judaism's lack of purpose, but our failure to transmit that purpose properly. A good way to notice when this happens is when someone says that, let's say, I have to do this, or you should do this because it's a mitzvah, or in other words, a mitzvah alone. Or someone tells their employee, I couldn't come to work on time yesterday because I was doing such, and such is a mitzvah. Not that certain things shouldn't outweigh others, but never when they're done blindly, without understanding what is being accomplished. Friends, the only reason we're given commandments or instructions is because they do good for the world's sake. So the real question is, how did we actually get so far that I even have to mention this in a class of Jewish philosophy? Well, this is the problem that arises when people never hear other opinions other than their own, when they never have to validate the rationality of their arguments with people who disagree with them. Thus, they are never able to refine their thinking. For example, people who live in bubbles, who the only people they see every day, every Shabbos, is people who think identically as they do. Whether that bubble is Eretz Israel or Williamsburg or Monroe, the job of the Jew is to be in the world, but obviously not be part of that world, but to elevate the mundane to the holy. But okay, moving on here. His next topic is ethical excellence. Having said these things about unethically, seemingly observant Jews, we wish to add 3 points of perspective concerning observant Jews and ethics. First, violent crime is virtually unknown among observant Jews, and this is true. This is as true in societies where Jews constitute the majority of population, as, for example, Israel, as where Jews constitute a minority. The abhorrence of bloodshed among Jews is historically attributable to Judaism's and its laws. Kashrus, for example, has for the past 3,000 years generated Jews a reverence for all life. As French scholar Anatole Bielou wrote in 1895, consider the one circumstance that no Jewish mother ever killed a chicken with her own hand, and you will understand why homicide is rarer among Jews than among any other human group. Secondly, the ethically excellent behavior is expected from observant Jews. Consequently, people are more likely to notice unethical and unkind acts committed by people considered to be religious. And it is well to bear in mind that the observation of Elie Wiesel concerning the behavior of rabbis in the concentration camps. In the camps, there were kapos, prisoners who worked for the Nazis, of German, Hungarian, Czech, Slovakian, Georgian, Ukrainian, French, and Lithuanian extraction. They were Christian, Jews, and atheists, former professors, industrialists, artists, merchants, workers, militants from the right and the left, philosophers, and explorers of the soul, Marxists and staunch humanists, and of course a few common criminals. But not one capo had been a rabbi. And the third possibility of improving the ethical conduct of religious Jews is greater than the possibility of doing so among secular Jews. Among observant Jews, there exists a recognized religious legal code to which one can appeal if one wishes to improve their ethical conduct. Though they may violate this code, at least they recognize it as binding. Now, this reminds me of the idea that an idea that I actually heard, I think, in a philosophy class in college, that there's always hope for someone to better themselves if they are moral, or, well, moral obviously, but also immoral. However, the difficulty arises when trying to help an amoral person, because amorality is no morality, because actually you have nothing to work with. That's why I never took groups like the Church of Satan seriously, because by someone saying perhaps they worship Satan in some way only means that they must have some basic biblical knowledge to know who Satan is, and to know that biblical standards are typically good and not evil. And if they were raised Christian, they also know that, or they also would know that Satan fights against those standards. And actually, that reminds me, I perhaps should make a video on the Jewish view of Satan, because it's actually pretty different than the Christian view. Anyways, what's actually being taught here when he states that improving the ethical conduct of religious Jews, or Jews who know some religion, is greater than someone who doesn't know at all. Obviously noting extremes that people can fall into, like perhaps communism in terms of amorality, and okay, the Taliban in terms of being religious on the other end of the extreme. But we can even see that during Pesach, during the Pesach Seder, that the apathetic son is worse than the evil son. Why? Because he doesn't care enough to make fun of the ritual. He's jaded. Nothing is really important to him, right? All perhaps is relative. And probably the only reason someone like this doesn't steal or commit some other heinous crime is perhaps because he might get caught. This is another example on how Jews nowadays confuse, let's say, what's legal with what's ethical, right? Many so-called Jews, or many so-called, religious Jews, also fall into the same trap by trying to confuse what's halachic with what's moral or ethical. But this argument is actually two sides of the same coin. Anyways, we have to remember that the amoral individuals in question here are secular Jews. Not that all secular Jews are amoral. Actually, many secular Jews were actually brought up observant, right? But went off the derech, off the right path for whatever reason. So the point of it all is better an immoral person than an amoral one. Because, why? Because the person who does not know or have acknowledged a higher form of morality, this person would first have to be reconstructed morally before he or she can be trained ethically. As a matter of fact, this really answers the previous question on how can the religious behave unethically. I think we spoke about that last class, or the class before that. I'm not sure how to remember. Well, anyways, why? Because embracing a higher truth is only the first step, and after it was embraced after it was embraced and is not put into action, those concepts actually end up shriveling up and dying, and an immoral person is made. But like we said earlier, this is still better than not having any basis at all, which actually gives birth to amorality, which is actually what society is trying to do to us and our children by stripping away any form of religious influence from our lives. If you want to see what kind of people this produces, I mean, just take a look at nihilistic Europe today, where people don't hold anything sacrosanct, where they can't even reproduce enough to replace their previous generation. Which actually opens up another concept on how immorality can lead their next generation to amorality. And with all the theories we hear about Europe soon becoming Muslim, thus leading them back to immorality. But see how many people we have in the chat room. We have 10 people. Okay, not bad. Again, please bear with me today. I'm broadcasting from a disclosed bunker. Soundproof, actually. Okay, so where were we here? Let's see. Okay. Okay. This was demonstrated during the Musar, or moral movement with religious Jewish life in the 19th century. The following incident in the life of Rabbi Israel Salanter, the founder of the Musar movement, illustrates how the ethical behavior of observant Jews may be improved by an appeal to the moral authority of the Torah. During the reign of Tsar Nicholas I, Jewish communities were forced to provide the Russian army with young Jewish boys for 25-year terms of service. Jewish communities consequently passed regulations to ensure that as long as there was a family from which no children had been taken, they would not conscript a second child from any family. Once, when visiting a city, Rabbi Salanter met a poor widow who was sobbing bitterly. When asked to explain her sorrow, she told the rabbi that she had just been informed that her second son was to be drafted because of the illegal intervention of a wealthy leader of the community, who wished to ensure that none of his children be taken. The rest of the community had acquiesced and decided to draft the widow's second child instead. Rabbi Salanter went that afternoon to the local synagogue, and when one man rose to lead the prayer service, the rabbi yelled at him, "It is forbidden for you to lead us in prayer, for you are not a believer in our God and our Torah." Okay, a replacement was sent, and Rabbi Salanter shouted the same thing at the second man. This happened a third time. Finally, the congregants asked Rabbi Israel Salanter to explain his behavior. "The fact that you pray does not prove that you're believers," he answered. "You pray because your fathers prayed. But you are obviously not believers in the Torah. How do I know this? If you believed in the Torah sincerely, believing that it was the voice of God commanding you, then how dare you ignore Torah law which forbids you to oppress a widow or to favor prominent people in judgment? That you're willing to ignore such laws shows that you do not believe in God and his Torah." I mean, this is actually a powerful, powerful statement here. And there's just so much that, I mean, I could say. I mean, actually being a victim of this currently. But I'll leave that aside. But one eye-opening place here is actually how the rabbis teach that the Shaliach Tzibor, apart from just being the one who leads the prayer, actually acts as the spokesman for the entire congregation. That being said, we as Jews should be very careful who we allow to lead the davening in our congregations, even though here we see that it's referring to mistreating a widow. How much more does it refer to someone desecrating the Sabbath, which is actually what the Jewish community is suffering from today. not making a distinction, a separation between secular Jews and religious Jews. And when we don't make that distinction, it's even harder for a non-Jew to make that distinction. That's why religious Jews typically end up dying for the sins of the secular. Why? Because non-Jews cannot tell the difference between a religious Jew and a secular Jew, right? But anyways, that's the meaning of Shaliach Tzibur, one who carries the prayers of the congregation. So, in this case, how could someone who deliberately, unethically holds such a position, or perhaps how it is in my community, how where the guy in the main shul, right, who's davening for the Amid would place the car keys on the stender, I mean, almost as a desecration to the whole service. How could this person be allowed to lead Orthodox congregation, even let's say a conservative congregation who really doesn't completely condone the idea of driving, but conservative synagogues say perhaps someone should drive if or they say it's better for someone to drive than just to remain at home and not pray. But no, I mean, conservative synagogues don't say, I mean, if you could walk, drive. But anyways, this is another clear reminder that perhaps we can fool people, but we can't fool God. Anyways, reading on. In order to improve the ethical behavior of religious Jews, Rabbi Salanter was able to appeal to their belief in the Torah. What is urgently needed today, right? Okay. What is urgently needed today is a renewed commitment among religious Jews, and particularly among their leaders, to ethical excellence. The religious Jews must serve as a moral light to secular Jews, just as Jews must serve as a moral example to the non-Jewish world. Imagine the effect it would have upon secular Jews if religious Jews were as identifiable by their commitment to ethical behavior as they are by their observance of Shabbos and Kashrus. Many in the religious communities are to blame for the widespread impression that religious Jews are no more ethical or kind than others. Too often, the religious leadership and its followers have lent credibility to this impression by emphasizing observance of person-to-God laws far more than observance of person-to-person laws. As a result, when we speak of a religious Jew, we immediately assume he or she keeps kosher and prays, but we do not necessarily assume that he or she is ethical. Now, this should really be the real reason it's hard to be Jewish. This that he touched on a few sentences back. Because the real reason that it's hard to be Jewish, it's because being Jewish is a life of servitude. To who? To the non-Jewish world. Everyone erroneously says that it's hard to be Jewish because of all the mitzvahs we have to keep. Well, that's not true at all, because we just spoke a few classes back on how someone could keep Torah and still be jerky. No, my friends, that's actually the easy part, right, when you realize it. But actually, when you think, what's the real purpose of being a Jew? It's clearly being a nation of priests for who? For the non-Jews. Anyways. Okay. A number of reasons can be suggested to explain this sad development. One is that while the religious community has always maintained communal institutions, regulating rituals, for example, rabbinic supervision of kashrus, it has had to allow governmental regulations to prevail in the more obviously social and ethical realms. Thus, one wishing to know whether a piece of meat is kosher will, of course, ask a rabbi. But if he wishes to know whether a given action is ethically kosher, he or she is far likely to turn to his rabbi or to Jewish sources, despite the fact that ethical issues are comprehensively legislated in Jewish codes of law. I'm not sure what he's referring to here. I mean, all perhaps not modern Orthodox Jews, but all the real stark Torah Jews I know go to their Rabbi for everything. Not just the Rabbi, but Das Torah. Unfortunately, many religious people have come to view their limited Judaism as constituting all of Judaism and restrict their religious concerns to the realm of the ritual. A second factor responsible for the fact that moral concerns are often not as great as they should be in the religious community is that Judaism is often transmitted to children not as a moral way of life, but as non-rational habits which become a social way of life. Many children raised in observant environments come to observe Jewish laws not from an appreciation of the law's moral and spiritual basis, but out of simple habits, out of fear of being caught violating the law, and because everyone around them is doing it. They are not taught to observe Jewish laws with the intention of becoming moral through them. And the laws therefore cease to have the morally elevating effect which they are meant to have. This is an interesting area to discuss here on how does someone successfully transmit these laws to their children. Because this, apart from serving as a moral example for the non-Jewish world, is actually the hardest part, or one of the hardest parts to remaining or even becoming Jewish. Excuse me. That's one reason why I've never really been such a fan of people forcing their children to remain Jewish after, let's say, their 18th birthday. Right? I've even heard rabbis talk to the youth about the importance of marrying Jewish and even having Jewish children. We have to get something straight. Look, if you need to be having this conversation with your child, that in itself is a sign that you've either screwed up your child's Jewish upbringing or your child is just not religiously inclined. Whatever the fact may be, there is no point in tarnishing the faith, not to mention the Jewish people, with having your offspring remain Jewish if they don't have the spreading of ethical monotheism as their sole purpose in life. Because honestly, the last thing Judaism needs is more secular Jews. And no, Judaism does not need more Jews. If all those Jews do is identify ethnically with it. As a matter of fact, this argues on why Judaism needs more converts, people who come to Judaism out of altruistic desires to better the world. And actually anyone, I think, who is against sincere converts coming into the fold have got their Judaic priorities upside down. For example, the Syrian synagogues, or many idiots out there who anyways, what I'm just so confused on how anyone could be against eager people who really want to serve God and keep His commandments, unless they hold a twisted notion of Judaism that really does not consider Judaism a religion, but some sort of superior race. Well, I got to tell you that if you believe that, you're tarnishing the wrong religion, because here there's no room for racism or ethnocentrics, right? At least not as long as I live. But okay, reading on. The core of the problem is that much of the observant community has come to regard and teach Jewish law as an end in itself rather than as a means to perfect the world under the rule of God. The term for the Jewish legal system, halacha, means way. Halacha is the way to reach a certain place. That place being morality and holiness. Too many Jews who travel the halacha have forgotten that it is only a way and not the place to which it is supposed to lead. Whoever makes the way into an end is lost. Sometimes, said the great Hasidic Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotzk, a mitzvah becomes idol worship. It, not God and goodness, becomes the end. The mitzvahs, my friends, are a means to a greater end, and not an ends unto themselves. What an eloquent statement. And like we said earlier, that mitzvahs done because they are mitzvahs and not for bettering this world. Here, like Rav Menachem Mendel of Kotzk correctly classifies them, are a form of idolatry. Actually, we could use this formula in many different ways. Even like we spoke about earlier, we could say that perhaps holding the title of being Jewish is also not an end unto itself, but rather a means to a greater end. Even for kashrus, let's say. Kashrus, many people who fall into this trap, people who think that it matters the hashgacha you eat, or if it's Pas Yisrael, or Chalav Yisrael, or if it's Galat or not. No, friends. Look, if you can't make a connection between the strictness of your kashrus and how it ultimately impacts the world with goodness, then you're just wasting your time, because God is not impressed. Why? Because even an animal can be trained on what or on what to eat or what not to eat. Right? I'm sorry, I mean, I want people to consider this. Those Jews, before they belittle someone in their community by stating that I don't eat in someone's house because I don't hold by their kashrus, right? Now, don't get me wrong. This is not a kosher or non-kosher issue, because individuals who do such things will not say that the reason they don't eat a certain product is not because it's not kosher for a Jew to eat, but rather it's just not proper for them to eat. But this is just another problem that we have to work on together. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so now he's starting a new area here. He says, how do you account for ethical people who are not religious? The ethics of an irreligious, actively moral person stems from one or more of three factors. 1. The moral legacy of religion. 2. The individual's innate or natural goodness. 3. A secular ethical philosophy. For example, humanism. The moral legacy of religion. The foundations of morality in the West are religious. Though a moral individual may be irreligious, he acquired his moral values from his ancestors, who in all likelihood were religious, and or from Western civilization, which adheres or at least pays lip service to moral values formulated by Judaism and communicated by Christianity. The ethical secularist is essentially living by moral values inherited from thousands of years of religion. Consequently, we ask whether the ethical secularist is capable of bequeathing a moral legacy to the next generation, now that he has cut them off from religion as the ultimate source of morality. The answer, as history has shown, is no. The existence of righteous individual secularists, notwithstanding the legacy of ideologies which attempt to destroy religion, has been unparalleled human suffering. Natural goodness, moral geniuses. A second explanation of the existence of ethical or religious people is the simple fact that nature produces a certain number of naturally good people, moral geniuses. We may call them, just as it is occasionally produces natural artists and scientific geniuses. But we cannot stop teaching music and rely on nature to occasionally blossom forth with musical geniuses. As music must be systematically taught in order to produce musician, goodness must be systematically taught in order to produce good people. Now he's talking here about a secular ethical philosophy. Finally, some ethical secularists will attribute their ethical values and behavior to a secular ethical philosophy, such as ethical humanism. We refer the reader to question 4, wherein we compare Judaism and humanism at some length. Suffice it to say, at this point, that secular humanism is completely subjective and has neither a God nor a legal ethical code, nor a people, nor a mode of transmission from one generation to the next. Humanism has no system for producing good people. It's only a set of personal ideas, which in any case are usually only restatements of Jewish ideas. It is not surprising that the ethical culture foundation was founded by a rabbi, Rabbi Felix Adler, in 1876. We spoke shortly last week about how people are born with a basic idea of right or wrong. Basic enough to get you to embrace a higher truth like Judaism, or in some cases where there is no Judaism, Christianity. But this actually speaks of another option here. The choosing of everything that's good and ethical of one or more religions, but stripping away the God aspect and relabeling it as a secular movement like humanism. Really, if you think about it, that's what Christians and Muslims have done. They take everything that's worthy in Judaism and just repackage it in a new box, almost like the Jefferson Bible or Reform or Conservative Judaism. But anyways, just like these movements, they have a hard time transmitting their beliefs to their next generation without adding a flimsier form of what they initially took out, which just ultimately ends up confusing them and hopefully having them stumble across on my videos and just returning to Judaism. So actually, any way you cut it, friends, we have the secularist beat. How? Well, we see the studies, how the religious are happier, how we give more charity, how we're more likely to reproduce, how we suffer less with depression, and ultimately make the world a better place to live in. Now, I know the old argument that a humanist will mention, well, how about radical Islam or the scarce radical Christian or Jewish fundamentalist? Or the old argument that people have died more in the name of religion than any other movement. Look, whatever group you belong to, you're always going to have people tarnishing your name. But actually, from a historical perspective, secular movements in the last 100 years have murdered more than all religious wars have put together. I mean, it's actually common sense, but for some reason, most people just don't come up with this idea because they never really want to put together the numbers, right? I mean, for example, the People's Republic of China and the People's Revolution alone exterminated, let's say, 65 million. In all, also just in the existence of communist China, roughly 100 million. The Soviet Union, let's say under Stalin, alone killed 40 million. Not to mention in its history that also killed around 100 million. Not to mention, let's say, the killing fields of Cambodia, which killed around the Khmer Rouge killed about 1.5 million, and also not to mention all the massacres in leftist revolutionary uprisings from North Korea to Latin America, all these secular movements that thought to make a utopia on earth without God. And also, again, I say that every Jewish movement also, call it Zionism or social democracy that ultimately became communism, Jewish movements that are not based on Torah are destined to fail. Let me see. Okay, we have 11 people online here. Again, thank you for bearing with me. The lighting here is not too good, but I'm actually broadcasting out of New York today. And please stay tuned for our next class with Rabbi Joseph Kolakowski on Hasidus and I guess practical Kabbalah. We also started a new class Tuesday nights at 9 o'clock with Roger Grayton, who is an emissary of the Sanhedrin in Israel, on the Noahide laws. It's called the Noahide side. That's actually our latest class that is really taking off. The Noahide laws is typically not something that I teach a lot, but I'm not against people teaching it. And again, eYeshiva is not my website. It actually belongs to Rabbi Kolakowski and Nachle Muna Hasidic Institute, and he puts a disclaimer on the website that our views are not the views of eYeshiva or Nachle Muna Hasidic Institute, and everyone, when confronted with a halakhic issue, should really consult their rabbis for what is halacha l'maisa. But let me go ahead and just read a little more here. Okay, well, we're coming to the end of this question here. We're in the conclusion. It says, in the sum, the existence of actively moral irreligious individuals in no way negates the need for a moral system, for one based on religious principles, and for a community of adherents to that system. Even with the best intentions, ethical atheists cannot be relied upon to perpetuate ethics. As Milton Steinberg has written, how is one to account for the goodness of so many irreligionists? Very simply, men often behave better than their philosophies. They cannot be expected to persist in doing so. In the end, how a man thinks must affect how he acts. Atheism must finally, if not in one generation, then in several, remake the conduct of atheists in the light of its own logic. It already has. The age of me-ism in our increasingly self-centered society is one such outgrowth of the secularization of our society. When the something higher embodied in God and religious values is destroyed, nothing is higher. In the secular age, we end up worshiping ourselves. We therefore implore those secular individuals who are concerned with ethics and with fighting for a good world to re-evaluate their secularism. Perhaps ethical, monotheistic religion in general and Judaism in particular constitute better ways to achieve the incredibly difficult task of making people and a better world. Okay, great. We're just going to end here on starting question 4 on page 77. Again, please stay tuned for Rabbi Kolakowski's class at 9 o'clock on Hasidus and Kabbalah. And please don't forget Rebbitzin Kolakowski's class Tuesday nights at 8 o'clock on Kashrus, followed by Roger Grayton, an emissary from the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem, on the Noahide side, the class on the 7 laws of Noah, and our Spanish classes Sunday mornings at 9, which is the Shulchan Aruch in Spanish, and Sunday night at 8 o'clock, which is To Be a Jew in Spanish. Okay, thank you, and God bless.